I always think about that kind of funny meme of the progression of humanity from kind of monkey to human, and then back over to kind of like it goes like hunched back all the way up to kind of fully vertical, and then back to hunched back because you're looking at your phone all the time. But I really think that that's true in a certain sense.
The Gen Z Podcast. 4 voices, unfiltered opinions on today's topics. We welcome you to speak freely and think deeply about today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gen Z Podcast, episode number 35. I'm Gavin Farnan, and with me is Micah McNeil, Felipe Segura, and Zachary Crilley. In this episode, we delve into the dark side of the rise in social media, screen time, and its relation to depression, feelings of loneliness, and other detrimental aspects of our phones and usage. We start with the alarming statistics around the impact on young men and women, get into the separation between girls and boys due to social media, and then talk about the future outlook and solutions that we have available. So we welcome you onto this episode 35 of the Gen Z Podcast, and we look forward to what you think of the episode. Let's dive in.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. As you can see, we have not released an episode for the past 3 weeks, and for this, we apologize. You're probably wondering what we've been up to the past 3 weeks, and we have been working on improving the podcast. We've been meeting in the back end, taking the lessons that we've learned from the first 30-plus episodes, and determining the best way forward. And we're happy to announce that we've come up with something. So we will be rebranding the podcast. What will this rebrand look like? The new podcast will go by a different name, the Gen Z Podcast. We will release episodes on a 2-week basis. Once a month, we will be interviewing inspiring characters from our generation, Gen Z. And in the other bi-weekly episodes, we will dive deep into topics that affect our generation. We thank you for joining us on this adventure. We are always in pursuit of making a better product for you to enjoy. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to continuing to serve you.
Yeah, so in vain, to what Zach alluded to, we will be doing a case study today, and that is going to involve the sort of correlation between spikes in mental health as it correlates with the rise and adaptation of social media. And the work that we're really going to be focusing on is from a behavioral psychologist by the name of Jonathan Haidt. He is a psychologist and professor known for pioneering his work between social media and mental health. Essentially what his thesis and sort of focus is on is how the rise of social media platforms have contributed massively to increases in anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues, especially amongst young generations, i.e. being Gen Z. So mainly for this discussion, we are obviously going to give you around like sort of the shocking data points for this, how it sort of relates to women and then also men, and then potential solutions. So I'll just start off and just, some of these eye-opening stats that we've sort of found over the last, 2 weeks and time preparing up for this episode. I think a lot of our viewers are going to be, quite shocked. But just to start off, the National Survey of Drug Use and Health is showing that there has been a 52% increase in depression amongst adolescents from 2005 to 2017. A study by Jean Twang showed that adolescents who spend more time on screens are most likely to report mental health issues. And one of the sort of shocking stats that she references is that there has been a 56% increase in suicide rates among young girls among 10 to 14 from 2007 to 2015. That's only 8 years. The fact that we have seen almost a double amount in the suicide rates of young women and girls as it correlates with social media is insane. So before I sort of get into more of the data, around that. What are you guys' just quick hunches as it relates to, sort of the data that I just mentioned?
I mean, throwing aside the hunches, that statistic is just devastating. And I've heard it before, but every time I hear it, it sends chills down my spine. These are our children. And we've talked about this in private, and I've had conversations with people who, look, there's a lot of reasons that lead to depression in an individual. And what we're talking about today is the intersection between depression and phone usage, right? And our phones are a tool that can be used for good or bad. And there have been massive advances in society and communication. Economically, these companies are some of the biggest companies in the world now, $1 trillion plus businesses. But what value is that if our children are deeply unhappy to the point of committing suicide? I mean, one of the saddest acts that one can commit and the most desperate acts that one can commit. So hunches, I mean, I think that phone usage has something to do with it. Exactly what it is borne out in the data where kids that use their phone more are more likely to have these signs of depression and suicide. Anecdotally, we can see it. I know it in myself. If I spend too much time on my phone, my quality of life goes down. If I spend my time comparing myself to others on social media, my quality of life goes down. I mean, these are tools that we've been given that are very powerful, but there's no user manual. And there's no real way that we've been given to be shown this is how you use it in order to support your life. And this is when you stop using it because it's taking away. And I really pray for the future of our generation and for humanity that we can find a way to use this as the powerful tool that it can be for connecting people instead of driving us further apart and making us depressed.
And adding on to that, there's a stat of 88% of teenage girls feel negatively about their body image. That was in 2019. And 37% were bullied online frequently. So just those 9 out of 10 girls feel negatively about their body image, which is just insane. And it just speaks to the point of focus. Like, if girls are focused on that, then how are they going to focus on work? How are they going to focus on applying themselves in other aspects of their life? So it's just this point where something needs to happen, and it's only getting worse. But I do feel like we're at a tipping point. But Felipe, if you have any thoughts there.
No, just to jump on top of what Zach was saying. I mean, it's not just our children; it's our generation as well. We grew up in this kind of environment, and whenever I hear these statistics, we're looking at the worst situations, right? But we're also, there's other things that are going on in this generation. Decrease in just being human in certain activities. When people spend 4 or 5 hours on social media, you're not outside, you're not interacting with people. And I think there's all types of statistics, from people having less sex to, obviously feeling depressed and being less human. And whenever I think about this, I always think about that kind of funny meme of the progression of humanity from kind of monkey to human, and then back over to kind of it goes hunched back all the way up to kind of fully vertical, and then back to hunched back because you're looking at your phone all the time. But I really think that that's true in a certain sense. So yeah, this is obviously a very complex problem, and that famous quote of we have caveman-like brains, Paleolithic institutions, and godlike technologies. I mean, this comes directly from that scenario that we find ourselves in, right?
I think, sort of saying in that same vein, Gavin, I think you alluded to, some of the stats around women. So that's where, at least for young women, and then, Gen Z women as well. So let's delve into that a little bit. Again, these are, it's different what teenage men and teenage women are sort of going through, and then Gen Z women, and then Gen Z men, and then also millennials as well. But what we are seeing from girls is a little bit worse as it relates to sort of depression, anxiety, self-harm, self-isolation, and loneliness. And just to get into that, the suicide rate among teenage girls has nearly doubled since 2010, right? Hospital admissions have raised 62% for self-harm, right? Has raised 62% among girls aged 15 through 19. Depressive symptoms amongst teenage girls has increased 52% from 2005 and 2017. I mean, this is just insane. And the reasons that are mostly citing is what, Gavin, I think you were alluding to, where it's sort of these cyberbullying to body image issues, where it's like, girls like think that they have to, be in this quite image or this ideal image of what a girl should look like. And this is leading to, heightened senses of depression, anxiety, and then eventually self-harm. And, I think it creates, a terrible precedent where it's like we're putting our females up to this pedestal of what they have to look like. And they're doing it. And you're seeing it, aesthetically, whether it be like a BBL or, lip injections like that. So what do you guys sort of think about that?
I mean, the crazy part to me in all of this is the pervasiveness. Like, these aren't marginal statistics. This is the majority. 97% of teenagers have a social media account. I was curious what commonplace things are less common or less pervasive than that. Less people own a house, own a car. Okay, you can understand that. Less people read books. Okay, you can understand that. Less people go to the doctor regularly than have social media accounts. I mean, this is so pervasive, which is frightening in a way, but I also think that there could be a silver lining in there, because this touches all classes, this touches all races, this touches all genders, this touches every religion, every segment of society. And when you have a problem that is of that magnitude, there will be an increased hunger for a solution. And we'll get later into the solutions, but I mean, the pervasiveness is a double-edged sword, because it's, one, so incredibly sad that it is so pervasive, but it also, I think, will greatly fuel the fire of a solution and coming up with something to make this better than it is now.
And sort of that same vein and focusing on, I think one thing that we can definitely contest to as men, these stats are, I feel so bad for men. And I feel bad for women in the whole generation as well. But hear these stats. These are interesting. A study by Cigna in 2020 found that 79% of Gen Z men aged 18 through 22 reported feeling lonely. A study of drug and use in health reports that there's been a 47% increase in major depressive episodes among young men aged 18 through 25 from 2009 to 2020. That same study found that 25% of young men also engage in binge drinking. So I said a lot there. 80% of men report feeling lonely. There's been a 40% increase in major depressive episodes among young men. And then you have 25% of young men engaging in binge drinking. So you couple loneliness with binge drinking with depression. That is not a good episode for men. There's a lot of things that I think of, right? So, men are unemployed more than women. Men engage in domestic violence more than women. We talk about, even mass shootings. Those are mostly, 18 to 24-year-old men. So a lot of the women stuff is internal, where you see, women might cut themselves or, might have a suicidal episode. Men, it's very external, right? Where you have a lot of men who are just sort of in their parents' basement. They're drinking, they're smoking, they're not going out, making relationships with potential intimate relationships outside. To quote one of my, favorite people, Scott Galloway, he says we're creating a lot of the most dangerous person alive. And I think he's right. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think what's interesting about both examples of men and women, and kind of the common thread that I see is it's all sort of relational, like you are lonely because you feel like you're not someone that, or you're not like someone that you saw on social media who has a ton of friends or seems incredibly happy. And for women, right, you see that you might not be as beautiful as this other person on social media, or you need to have this thing to look beautiful or whatnot. And so I think that that kind of just reveals something about social media in general, is that it takes advantage of kind of your feeling of being empty or wanting something more, or that specific drive in humans. And it seems to leverage that more than other things, right? And so I think, that is a natural inclination we have, probably helped us survive as a species or whatnot. But again, when you have like a godlike technology like this, just hijack it, and then absorb 5-6 hours of your day, just always in this constantly thinking, comparing mode. I mean, you're bound to be depressed, and then you're always consuming social media alone. So you're going to be lonely as well, right?
Yeah, I think about what this comes back to, and it's just information and what that information does to our thoughts. Like with women, if they're looking at social media, the more time they spend on there, the less they think of themselves, because they just compare to all these people on social media. Then for men, it's like the more they look at that, it's they feel not as wealthy as the other men, or they feel that their actions, they're not as hard, or they're not as fit, or whatever the case may be. But in both cases, it's this separation of thought in terms of, oh, this is abnormal that I'm less than these people, therefore I should be depressed because I'm not as good. So it's just in both camps, we're both being separated by this loneliness and being lesser than we think we should, which is just a recipe for disaster. Like Felipe said, having less sex, having less relationships with one another. So it's just this never-ending loop of just trying to get away from each other that just can't happen.
Yeah, and just a quick point on top of that, what Gavin said is I believe that there is now a gender gap in political affiliation between young men and young women. So there is also that kind of showing that separation that's happening because, there's just no interaction between the two different sexes, right?
And with if we've pointed out the problem here, we all get it. Yeah, depression rates are up in men and women. It's not good, and a lot of it is caused to the phone. I don't want to say that it's all the phone, because there's other factors going on. Not all social media, not all the phone, but it's something. It's very prevalent, and there's a correlation certainly between the time that these tools were released and the increase in depression. But what's really interesting about this is that if all of this were to happen in the span of a month, as opposed to the decade, 2 decades that it's happened over, I think governments would ban it. Religious leaders would say that we need to cut it out. No family would allow it in their house. But this has been a slow creep from digitization, and then MySpace, and then more time on the phone, and Facebook, and more time, to the pervasiveness where it is now, where the average American spends more than 3.5 hours on their phone every day, right? And that's just every American, not even young people. So that is really an interesting concept to me to think about in terms of if we didn't know anything about this and this were introduced in the state that it is today, I think our whole society would go, whoa, this is way too much, way too fast. But because it's been this slow buildup, it's like the boiling frogs in a pot, right? Like if you drop a frog in a boiling pot, it will immediately jump out. But if you keep it there and you just slowly turn up the water, they won't even realize that they're in danger. But the good part is that I think that we have realized that we're in danger, and that we're oriented towards finding solutions. And the beautiful part about humanity is that we're incredibly resilient, and that we will find a way.
Just sort of to add on there, and then, let's get into the solutions after this one final point. I sort of want to just give viewers a thought experiment. 64% of Gen Z, if you ask Gen Z, and then millennials as well, if they could go back in time, to Zach's point to add on, and not have social media, the overwhelming, or 62% say yes. right? So what does this tell us, right? And this is a thought experiment. And because I'm so guilty of it, and I think that a lot of people are, no matter how stoic and great and Andrew Huberman you try to be, but two things. One, I remember when I was younger, there was this thing called tags for likes, where you would literally, you would download an app and then you would get more likes on your posts to raise your social status. Imagine that. I know our viewers can imagine that. And then the second thing is, because these phones have been so addicting made, right? Even though majority of users, would, if they could go back, they'd reverse it and then not use it. But what happens to me has happened to me often, and something that I'm trying to fix is, when you go to sleep and you wake up, what is the first thing that you do? Majority of people, they're going to say that, they don't go on their phones, but that's the first thing that you go. You go look at Instagram, you go look at your social media, etc., because you're chasing that, like, little hint of dopamine, or you're going on Hinge, seeing, who liked your profile or something like that. And it's so addicting and persuasive, and these, social media platforms and these dating services and etc. have been made to do this, right? I check, it'll be a Saturday, and I'm checking my email 8-9 times. Why am I doing that? There's nothing there for me. But we're so addicted to just sort of touching these things, and it's very persuasive, and it's problematic, and we're all guilty of it, where it's like, I even get to the point sometimes where, I'll delete Instagram for like a couple of days, and then out of nowhere I find myself re-downloading it. For what? Just to see people virtue signaling about what they're doing and how great their lives is. Felipe, you sort of mentioned it. It's sort of this facade. People are just wearing this mask of this, sort of, fake life that they're living, where, if you open up the curtains, there's probably a lot of shit under there. So, taking away from that tangent and sort of, going to some of the solutions that, Jonathan Haidt implements, is that there is a potential delayed social media use, where there is age restrictions, where parents delegate the use of social media until children are 16. He also looks for stricter social media regulations, where there's an age verification that social media platforms have to implement. And then he also cites sort of legislation and policy. Just to give you guys a couple of examples, California, New York, North Carolina, and Florida, at least domestically, have issued sort of phone-free schools. So, like, you go to school, your phone has to be away the whole day, with the goal of obviously increasing social interaction and decreasing distraction. Internationally, Japan, UK, South Korea, and France have been doing this for decades, where you can't have a phone at all. And then he finally cites sort of parental involvement, where parents are not only monitoring their social media use amongst their children, but also having conversations about it and understanding that, this is a very persuasive thing, and you shouldn't engage in it because it's just going to lower your quality of life. I said a lot there. What are you guys' thoughts about possible solutions? If you want to add on, disagree.
I think there's two different things here. Like, if we look at generation by generation, I mean, the younger generation has less of a ability to make that decision and be correct. But for Gen Z, for us, like 20 to 30-year-olds, it's mostly going to be individual. I mean, if you're spending 7 hours on your phone, that's on you. You just have to take it on yourself to be better. But at the point where it's a child, I think that parental intervention and, I guess, governmental intervention would be more applicable. I mean, look at China. I don't want to take a page out of their book, but they proposed a new rule in August 2023, where children under 8 would have 40 minutes per day maximum. Children between 8 and 16, 1 hour of screen time. And then teenagers over 16 and under 18, 2 hours per day. And they also suggest a minor mode on these social media platforms and gaming platforms to limit their screen usage as well. So I'm not sure if we want to go that extreme, but I do think at the very least schools could get involved and then it's mostly on the parents. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to, as far back as Plato's Republic, right? He has a program for how you raise the kids of the city, because there is kind of a knowledge of, or a wisdom in, once you're over 18, you're going to make certain decisions and you're probably free to make those. But before you're 18 years old, these are developmental steps, and you have to be the type of person, or at least society should hope that you're the type of person and is invested in you becoming the type of person who makes the right decision over 90% of the time, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think some of those solutions are worth a shot. Definitely the schools one, I think, is a very easy, no-brainer, can be done like that and would show significant results. But yeah, I mean, even with people our age, I mean, I personally have an app called ClearSpace that I use. And every time I try to go on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, it prevents me from immediately going on. It says, like, you have to take a breath. It's essentially like a minute break between I can actually go on. And a lot of times I go, wait, why am I going on this app? Let me get out of it. Like, I don't need to be on this app. And I've liked it so far. I've been using it for a month. And so I'll probably expand it out to like email and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think the point is even after 18, you're still going to have some type of controls, and that's probably going to be a more free market. I'd say more libertarian, like it has to be up to the individual to do it. But it's definitely not an easy task. And I don't see, at least for adults, just knowing that I didn't have TikTok at 16 or at 15, but like I still find it kind of addicting. It's scary. I mean, it's a scary reality.
Two thoughts here. One is how do we solve this problem at the social level, and then the other question is how do we solve this problem for ourselves? Because frankly, it's something that I struggle with and that I am very interested in making improvements with in my life. At the social level, I concur with what you're saying, that we have to stop the bleeding at the source, and that's raising the next generation of kids to not have the same issues with phone overusage and depression and suicide that this generation has had. Let's learn our lesson. We made a mistake. Can't go into the past, but let's correct it going forward. How do we do that? In my opinion, it has to start at home. Kids learn from their families, and the families have to take a stronger stand in setting rules about being intentional about technology usage. I think that it's not going to be easy. I mean, I see it with my little cousins. It's really like an opioid for children. I mean, you have a crying toddler and you hand them an iPad and they get tranquilized. I mean, it's really a powerful tool, and I can very much empathize with parents that want to use that. You know, maybe they come home from a long day. Who knows? But it's really doing a great service to your child in the long term to set up an intentional technology use system. That's one. I also have strong belief in community level action, whether it is through schools, through religious communities. Um, I think that this is where strong moral framework has been implemented throughout society, and frankly, it hasn't caught up to this technological age. But I have faith that it will, and that the churches and the community centers will. They probably already know what an issue this is, but they'll start to come up with solutions to combat this in more of a spiritual way and more of a way of looking, okay, what is the root cause of this? That's making people want to spend so much time and kind of avoid their life, consciously or subconsciously, going on social media. So that's my hope for the social level. On the personal level, I echo Felipe's point. I also have an app that I plugged into other apps, and when I open email or when I open a social media, it makes me breathe in and breathe out. And most of the time I hate it because I'm like, just let me get into my freaking email. And I found a way where if I like open and close the app really quickly, it won't even detect it, which is funny. I mean, we're humans. We find a way around things. But that I find myself sometimes being like, okay, it's not worth it, or okay, let me actually take a second and what am I doing here? I also have an app that blocks, it's called Opal. It blocks non-productive apps during productive time. So I can't open um, whatever, Snapchat or Reddit or these things. I I deleted Instagram. I deleted Twitter. It just didn't. I didn't trust myself to have it. I just found that I was spending too much time if I had it, and that it really wasn't doing anything to move the needle. But really, what opened my eyes to how deep this issue had claws in my brain was when I had a experience to a Vipassana meditation retreat where for 10 days I was without my phone entirely, and coming back, I didn't want to touch my phone. I delayed touching my phone for as long as possible because in those 10 days, I connected with myself and understood that it's a tool that is it's been too powerful for me, and I was given it at too young of an age, and I'm still learning how to use it, and I'm falling on my face a lot in using it, and it's not always making me feel good. So this is what I do, and I hope that in the future I can continue to be better with it and let it serve me, and I hope that for you three and for our listeners as well.
I actually have a general question.
Wait,
Do
can
you
I
find-
comment real quick? Can I
Oh
comment?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Zach had his Steve Jobs awakening, started reading the Bhagavad Gita a little bit, got into some Eastern philosophy and Eastern religion. It changed him. It made him look in, not out.
Yeah, I have a question for you guys. Do you guys find any value in social media in general? And like I say this because I feel like if you're the right person who can utilize social media, it's advantageous because the algorithm is tailored to things that you find interesting, and so then it connects you immediately with content that you find really interesting. Like I remember I was in Europe with a group of young people, and like I guess the joke that they do in Spain is they go, "Show me your For You page on Instagram." So just like click on it, and like what is the content that shows up, right? And so like people are kind of joking around of like what actually, because it shows you what you're interested in, right? Your For You, and like it's tailored to the algorithm. And I thought that was so interesting because like basically like if you're someone who's always like really interested in entrepreneurship or business, those types of videos will show up. Those type of content will immediately be brought to your attention. If you're interested in other stuff, it immediately brings you. If you're interested in Smurfs, it's going to bring up Smurfs content to you, right? So I don't know. I think there is value in it, but I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts. Yeah.
I can jump in first. It depends, right? It also depends for that social media. In terms of ideas and the free flowing of ideas, that's what I use Twitter for. What's become pervasive about Instagram, even though that you can do that on your For You page, I want all of our listeners and us, the ones who do have Instagram, to do sort of a thought experiment. Just go on Instagram and scroll 5 times and tell me how many times you actually see your friends, right? The original intent of Instagram, it doesn't do that anymore. What you are going to see is you're going to see 7 ads, right? And those 5 scrolls. You're not going to even see your friends, right? So it's almost became sort of this nest to post on your 24-hour story to show, with gelato or what vacation you're on that week. So it all depends on the goal, right? That you're trying to do. If you're a content creator, Instagram is a perfect avenue. If you're on TikTok, it's a perfect avenue. If you're on Twitter, it's a perfect avenue. But if your intent is to go on Instagram and see your friends, that's not going to happen anymore, right? I use Twitter exclusively for like the free flowing of ideas and the fact that you can connect with people if you have a great idea. It's beautiful. That's where I get my news. Twitter, I love Twitter. It is my favorite thing in the world. But so to answer your question, I guess the short answer is it all depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking to go look at reels on Instagram of things that you like, that reiterates the things that you already like, whether it be YouTube videos or content streaming or videos of people eating food, whatever thing you like, you can find that on Instagram. And in that case, it might be meaningful for you. To me, it isn't. Twitter does that for me, but it all depends.
I'm going to take the extreme other side here, and I think that any minute spent on social media is a net negative. Honestly, I think that if you want to learn something, then read a book, because it's the same thought process of, oh, I can get rich in a day, and you can't learn information in 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Like, that is just such shallow information that you're getting on all of these different topics every 30 seconds you decide to scroll. And if you're interested in something, then learn about it deeply. And that's really the only times that I've learned something of value is through books or through longer form podcasts and things like that. But on social media, Instagram, TikTok, things like that, I always get off of them saying, all right, that was a net negative on my day, and I just gotta, I can't open that back up. So I genuinely believe that if you're not creating economic value through these apps, then it's a net negative. Like, it's intertwined with our economy, and that's going to keep on going. So I think that if you're outwardly posting and adding value, then I think it's a positive. But if you're consuming, then complete net negative no matter what.
Yeah, I take the perspective of twofold. One is the societal, it's like finding the solutions, and then the other one is personal. Societal, I think there's strong arguments that can be made that it can connect people that have niche interests. It can be a platform for people to talk about issues, to raise alarm bells about things. I mean, politically, I would say, but a lot of countries have clamped down on the ability to do that. Um, but for the personal side, I mean, look, this is a tool, right? And it's like, okay, what value is a hammer? Well, if you're hitting yourself in the head with it, it's a net negative. But if you're using it to hammer something in, then there's a value to it. And this is a tool. And frankly, it's just a tool that we haven't learned to use, that I haven't learned to use. And I've noticed that I usually just hit myself in the head. So I'm like, okay, I don't need the hammer. I don't want the hammer right now. So for me, I don't think it has a place in my life right now. And I've been trying to cut it out as much as possible. Am I perfect? No. Do I fall? Yes. But that's my answer to the question. Get rid of the hammer.
And adding in here, I feel like we've been very pessimistic on the past, but looking at the future, people do seem to be becoming more and more aware. For example, Deloitte did a study in 2023 showing that 54% of Gen Z are actively trying to reduce screen time. And then in 2023 as well, Common Sense Media had a study on parents, and 63% more parents are concerned about screen time with their kids compared to before the pandemic, and 56% have set stricter screen time limits. So as we've been saying, these solutions are, I feel like, just now being implemented, and there is some light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm hopeful that these will start reducing, and then parents will become more aware. I mean, it's just the information that comes out will be able to make more decisions. And I feel like that information is just becoming more and more aware of.
Yeah, and sort of in closing, that's why we did this episode, right? I believe that Jonathan Haidt is the most important psychologist in the world right now. I believe the work on this, because you know what it is? This is something that you feel, right? So trying to wait and get all the data is sort of and wait for the lag and the data to come back doesn't make sense. This is something that people in our age group are feeling. This is something that parents are feeling. And this is something that is just going to continue unless we change course. So, that was sort of the goal, right? That's what we're doing. Let's have a conversation about it and sort of go from there. So, thank you for alluding to those stats, and that's sort of it for you guys this week.
First episode of the Gen Z podcast, ladies and gentlemen. We're in it with you. Thanks for being in it with us.